Here's a story which I could have told you the story before. I could have told you the story several times before, but I'm telling you to again. And when Rabbi Mendel Futafas was in prison, he was in Siberia. He was in Siberia like for 7 years. And he heard a lot of things over there, very interesting things. And he heard a lot of stories. And here's a picture of Rebbe. Anyway, so he heard a lot of stories over there. And one of the stories was the deep sea diver. The deep sea diver. What's the deep sea diver? So he said when he was here, here's a picture of him. Is this a good picture? I don't know if it is. Here we go. Mendel Futterpass. Oh, Mendel Futterpass. My camera has some sort of a dot in it. I don't know. Here we go. Okay, and so he was in Siberia for 7 years, and he heard a lot of stories from a lot of people. And one of the stories he heard was from the deep sea diver. The deep sea diver, he said that he was in the Tsar's navy. Stalin threw everybody into prison. Anybody that he thought might in the future have a thought of rebelling against them. They say he killed up to 50 million of his own people. However, he killed, some people say it wasn't that bad. He wasn't so, he only killed 30 million people, not to exaggerate. In any case, one of the people that Reb Mendel was there with was a deep sea diver. He had been a sailor in the Tsar's navy, and he was trained to be a deep sea diver. What do they need a deep sea diver for? They weren't as mobile as they are now. Deep sea divers, they couldn't go from one ship. A deep sea diver, sometimes a ship would sink, and there was a lot of metal, and also sometimes there would be guns and cannons and machines, whatever it is, on the ships. They would want to salvage them. So what would they do? They would lower down deep sea divers from a ship. They would bring a ship above the place where this sunken ship was. They would bring it on this, and they would lower down these big chains, two huge chains. Sometimes there would be more than one ship, two ships. They would lower down these two chains. Then they would lower down a deep sea diver, and he would he'll link these two chains together. Those days, a deep sea diver, he had to have like a pipe that went up to his ship. The pipe that when we would go down, he would be like in this airtight suit that had a window, and they would pump air down into his suit, and then he would attach these two the chains. They had a big hook on the end, and then they would lift the ship up from the ground. They would tow it into the dock, and somehow or other they would bring it up to shore, and they would salvage whatever they could, or they would fix the ship, whatever they would do. So he tells the story to Reb Mendel. They had nothing to do this in the nighttime, so he would hear these stories. So this deep sea diver told Reb Mendel that sometimes there would be ships that would be sunken under the water for a certain amount of time, a few months, whatever, and rust would set in which case they couldn't just lower down two chains with two hooks because the ship wasn't strong enough to keep together. And then they would just pull up only that part where they hooked the hook up to, it would separate itself from the rest of the ship. And that they didn't want. And so I guess there was those big guns there or whatever that took, who knows, a year to rust, whatever it was. Anyway, how would they salvage a ship like this? So Reb Mendel told the story that this deep sea diver told Reb Mendel that what they would do was they would have take a big plate of iron, and they would attach to this big plate of iron like hundreds of hooks, hundreds of like smaller chains or whatever it is, iron ropes or whatever. At the end of each one of these ropes, iron ropes, there was like welded onto this plate, there was a hook. And then they would put this big plate somehow or other between two big pieces of rubber, which they would, I guess, whatever is mold this rubber together so it was completely closed. And the place where these chains came down, they would make little holes, put the chains, and then they would close these holes up so that water wouldn't get into it. No. And then what would they do? They would take the ships, the salvaging ships that would, and they would bring them over the sunken ship. They would locate the sunken ship. They would bring these salvaging ships over it, and the two ships would lower down this big, huge mat, and the deep sea diver would go down, and he would go down with the mat, and then they would pump up the rubber that was in this mat. They would pump it up so that it would expand. It would expand really so that the metal was like, next to the bottom of it, the inside, the inside bottom of this big, huge rubber balloon. They would pump it up. Who knows? It would take hours and pump it up, and then before they would pump it up, the deep sea diver, they would hook these hooks into like 100 different places on the ship, so that it would be evenly distributed. And then they would pump up the balloon. They would pump it up, and it would lift up this balloon with the metal the plate inside of it. And the plate, of course, was attached to all these chains with hooks on it. And the hooks were attached to the ship, and it would lift up the ship sufficiently that they could drag it into, under the water. They would pull it into the docks, and then they would bring it up and salvage what they could, whatever. So Rav Mendel said he heard the story. He heard the story, how they would salvage an old ship, an old rusted ship, and they would bring a mat down, and they would attach these little hooks to it. But he had no idea why he heard the story, what the story has to do with him. Until one day, this is how I heard the story, until one day, he was in a Farbringen in Kfar Chabad. And suddenly he remembered the story, and he understood the purpose. What was the purpose? Right before the 6-Day War, a week, 2 weeks, whatever, before the 6-Day War, so the Rebbe surprisingly and mysteriously announced that he wants all of his Hasidim to go out in the streets and put tefillin, especially on the soldiers, but to put tefillin on people in the streets and the soldiers. They went down. This Rabbi Moshe, how can I forget his name? Anyway, he went in the kotel, and he made a table by the kotel over there. And yeah, and anyway, so they were putting on tefillin on everybody. So all of a sudden, Mendel Futafes said, I understand why the Rebbe wants us to put tefillin on everybody. He says it's the same thing as the ship. The Jewish people have been sunken in exile for 2,000 years, and they're separated one from the other, just like the rusted ship. And the Rebbe wants to lower down to the ship and hook everybody up with tefillin, right? To put tefillin on everybody. And then the Rebbe is going to be the one, he's going to be like the big mat. And it says, Ruach HaPeinu Mashiach Hashem, the Rebbe is the Mashiach, is going to lift all the Jewish people up. Whoop, at one time, doesn't make any difference if they're all rusted, if they're all this, but they'll have a connection to Judaism. And Mashiach will elevate them, lift them all up, and salvage this whole ship, which is called the Jewish people, at once. That's why it's so important to go out and convince other Jews to do commandments, because that's going to hook every single Jew, or at least the critical mass of Jews, to lift up the whole entire Jewish people with Mashiach now. Have a good day. God willing, see you all tomorrow, 8:15.